The wind came first. It always did in Redemption Flats. A slow, dry breath that rolled down from the Black Hills and pushed the dust across the street like it was searching for something to bury. On the night this story truly began, that wind carried the smell of wood smoke, of iron, and of something warmer. Something that did not belong in a town like this. Bread. Fresh bread. In a place where men had forgotten what soft things tasted like. Before we go any further, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments. Whether you're listening from a quiet kitchen, a long highway, or a bed where sleep won't come, I'm sending love your way. Stay with me, because what happened on the Callahan Ranch in the summer of 1878 is the kind of story old cowhands only told once, and only after the third whiskey. They said Silas Callahan married the wrong woman. They said she was too quiet, too pale, too soft-handed for the frontier. They said she couldn't cook a pot of beans without burning the bottom black. His ranch hands laughed behind her back. His own brother warned him she wouldn't last a season. But 3 months later, 30 hard men were lining up at her table like church boys on Sunday. And Silas Callahan was standing in his own barn, holding a letter he was never supposed to read, with his hands shaking so bad he could not fold it back up. Because his wife was not who she said she was, and what she was feeding his ranch was only the beginning. Silas Callahan met her in a rail town called Bitter Fork, on a Tuesday that smelled like rain and horses. He was 34 years old, a widower for 6 of those years, and the kind of man who had stopped expecting good things to happen to him. His first wife, Martha, had died of fever one winter while he was 200 miles away buying cattle. He had never quite forgiven himself for that. He had never quite forgiven God either. So he stopped talking to both of them, and he poured his grief into the land, and the land, being what it was, took every drop and asked for more. His ranch sat 40 miles south of Redemption Flats, pressed up against the low red bluffs where the grass turned yellow by June. 2,000 head of cattle, 30 men on the payroll, a long white house with a porch that sagged on one side because he had never gotten around to fixing it, a kitchen that had not smelled like a woman's cooking since Martha died. He had come to Bitter Fork that Tuesday to buy salt, nails, and a new rifle. He was not looking for a wife. He would swear that later, in front of the sheriff, in front of God, in front of his own dying brother. He was not looking. But she was standing under the awning of the general store when the rain started, holding a small carpet bag in both hands, and she was so still that at first he thought she was a painting someone had leaned against the wall. She was maybe 26, dark hair pinned up neat, a gray traveling dress that had been fine once, but had been mended at the elbows. Her boots were wet. Her eyes were the color of river stones, a green so pale it was almost gray, and they did not flinch when Silas looked at her. That was the first thing he noticed. Women out here usually looked away from a man like him. He was tall, sunburned, and he wore his grief on his face like a brand. She did not look away. "You need somewhere dry, ma'am?" he asked. He was not a man who spoke much. The words came out rougher than he meant. "I need work," she said. Her voice was low and even. Eastern, he thought. Not from any place he knew. "What kind of work?" "Any kind. I can sew. I can read. I can keep books." She paused, and her mouth did something that was almost a smile but not quite. "I can cook. A little." Silas Callahan should have tipped his hat and walked on. He should have bought his salt and his nails and gone home to his sagging porch and his empty kitchen. Instead, he heard himself say, "My ranch is south of here, 40 miles. I got 30 men to feed and a house nobody's lived in properly since my wife passed." He swallowed. "It's honest work. Hard work. Room and board. $15 a month." She looked at him a long time. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the tin awning above them. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. "Mr. Callahan," she said. And he had not told her his name, and he noticed it clear as a bell, but he was tired and lonesome and the rain was loud. "I would rather be a wife than a hired girl. If you'll have me." He stared at her. He should have asked her name. He should have asked where she came from, who her people were, what she was running from. Because a woman does not stand in the rain in a strange rail town and offer to marry a stranger unless she is running from something. Silas Callahan knew that. He was not a stupid man, but he was a lonely one. They were married the next morning by a circuit preacher who was passing through on his way to Fort Sumner. She signed the paper Elena Rose Hartley. She told him she was from St. Louis. She told him her parents were dead, and her brother was dead, and there was nothing left back east that she wanted to remember. She told him she would be a good wife to him, and she would ask nothing of him but a roof and a name. Silas Callahan believed her. He put her carpet bag in his wagon, and he drove her 40 miles south through country that got drier and redder with every mile, and by sundown they were sitting on his sagging porch watching the light bleed out of the sky. She did not speak the whole way, but once, when the wagon hit a rut and jolted her sideways, her sleeve rode up past her wrist, and Silas saw the mark on her forearm. A burn, old, round, about the size of a silver dollar. The exact size, he thought later, of the bottom of a hot coffee pot. He did not ask about it. He was not the asking kind. But that night, lying in the dark with his new wife breathing soft in the bed beside him, Silas Callahan realized he had brought a stranger into his house, and he did not know one true thing about her. And down in the bunkhouse, his foreman Toomey was already telling the men that the boss had lost his mind, that the woman was too soft, that she wouldn't last a month, that by the first frost, Silas would be feeding her back onto the eastbound train. Toomey was wrong about all of it, but he was right about one thing. Something on the Callahan ranch was about to change, and it would start, of all places, in the kitchen. For the first 2 weeks, Elena Callahan did almost nothing. That was what the men said, anyway. She walked the yard in the mornings with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She stood at the fence and watched the horses. She sat on the porch in the long blue evenings and read from a small leather book she had brought in her carpet bag. And when Silas asked her once what it was, she said, "Poems. Nothing important." And she closed it and set it aside. She did not cook. She did not clean. She did not sew. The cooking on the Callahan ranch had, for 6 years, belonged to a one-eyed man named Pike. Pike had been a cook in the Union Army, and he cooked like it. Beans that could break a tooth, biscuits that could stop a bullet, coffee so strong the men joked you could shoe a horse with it. Nobody complained. Nobody dared. Pike had killed 3 men at Antietam with a bayonet, and he still kept the bayonet under the flour sack. So when Elena walked into the cookhouse on the 15th morning after her wedding, tied an apron around her waist, and quietly said, "Mr. Pike, I would like to help with supper tonight," every man within earshot stopped what he was doing. Pike looked her up and down with his one good eye. He was a barrel-chested man with a beard like a bramble bush. He had opinions about women in his kitchen, and none of them were kind. "Help?" Pike repeated slowly. "Help how, Mrs. Callahan?" "I thought I might make the bread," she said. Pike laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. 2 of the younger hands, Willie and Cortez, who were sitting at the long plank table peeling potatoes, laughed too, though quieter, because they had seen Pike's bayonet. "The bread," Pike said. "Ma'am, with respect, I've been making the bread on this outfit since before you knew what bread was." Elena did not move. She did not raise her voice. She just stood there in her gray dress and her clean white apron, and she waited. And there was something in her stillness, the same stillness Silas had seen under the awning in Bitter Fork, that made Pike's laughter dry up in his throat. "Fine," Pike said finally. "Make the bread. Burn the bread. See if I care." She thanked him. She washed her hands. She asked, very politely, where the flour was, where the lard was, where the salt was, and where she might find yeast. Pike watched her the whole time with narrowed eyes, waiting for her to break something, waiting for her to cry, waiting for her to give up. She did not give up. She worked from 10 in the morning until 5:30 in the afternoon, and she did not let anyone see the loaves until they came out of the oven. And when they came out, the smell, my God, the smell, rolled out of that cookhouse and across the yard like a hand pulling every man on the ranch toward the table. The bread was golden on top and soft as a cloud inside. It had a crust that crackled when you tore it and steam that rose up in a fine white curl. She had put something in it, rosemary, maybe, and a whisper of honey, and it did not taste like anything any of those men had eaten on the frontier. It tasted like a memory they didn't know they had. It tasted like a mother somewhere, in a kitchen somewhere a long time ago when the world was still a soft place. Cortez, the youngest hand, ate 4 slices and started to cry, quietly, into his sleeve. He was 17 years old, and he had not seen his mother in 3 years. Nobody teased him for it. Nobody could. Pike ate 1 slice. He chewed it slowly. He swallowed. He looked at Elena for a long moment, and then he pushed back from the table and walked out into the yard without a word. An hour later, he came back, took off his apron, folded it carefully, and set it on the table in front of her. "It's your kitchen now, Mrs. Callahan," he said. "If you'll have it." She said she would. That was how it started. The next night she made a stew. Real stew with wine in it, and herbs Silas had never seen growing on the property. Though later he would find her small garden hidden behind the smokehouse where she had been quietly planting things for 2 weeks. The night after that, she made a chicken pie with a crust so flaky it fell apart in the men's hands. The night after that, apple dumplings, though nobody could figure out where she had gotten the apples. Word spread. Ranch hands from neighboring outfits started finding excuses to ride over at supper time. Mrs. Hollis from the next spread down showed up on a Sunday with a peach cobbler and left with 3 of Elena's recipes and a strange, thoughtful look on her face. Silas himself found that he was eating more than he had eaten in years, and that he was smiling sometimes in the evenings on his sagging porch, with his wife's small warm shoulder pressed against his arm. He should have been happy. He was happy, but there were things he was starting to notice, and once he noticed them, he could not stop. He noticed that Elena never sat with her back to a door. Not once. Not at breakfast, not at supper, not on the porch. She always positioned herself so she could see every way in and every way out. He noticed that when a rider came up the road, any rider, she would go very still and watch him from the kitchen window until she could see his face, and only then would she breathe again. He noticed that she had begun keeping a small pistol in her apron pocket. Pearl-handled Derringer. Not the kind of gun a farm girl from St. Louis would own. And he noticed, one night in early July, when he came back to the house late from checking on a sick cow, that his wife was standing at the kitchen table in the lamplight, and she was cleaning that Derringer with the practiced ease of a woman who had done it 1,000 times before. She looked up when he came in. She smiled at him, soft and tired. "Supper's warm on the stove, Silas," she said. He did not ask her about the gun. But that night, for the first time since their wedding, Silas Callahan lay awake in the dark and thought about the burn on her wrist, and the way she had known his name in the rain, and the way not one letter had come for her in 3 months. No letter from St. Louis, no letter from anywhere, no letter at all. And he wondered, with a slow cold feeling in his belly, who exactly was sleeping in his bed. The stranger rode in on a Thursday. He came up the long road from the south, out of the shimmer of the July heat, on a lean roan horse that looked like it had been ridden hard for a week. He wore a long gray duster despite the sun, and a black hat pulled low, and he had a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle and a pistol on each hip. 2 pistols. That was the first thing Toomey noticed, because a man with 1 pistol is a working man, but a man with 2 is a man expecting trouble. He stopped at the front gate of the Callahan Ranch, and he did not dismount. He just sat there on his horse in the beating sun, and he waited to be noticed. Toomey walked out to meet him. He kept his hands loose at his sides. He was not armed himself, because it was a workday, but there was a Winchester leaning against the fence post 6 feet away, and Toomey made sure the stranger could see it. "Help you, friend?" Toomey said. The stranger tipped his hat back with 1 gloved finger. His face was lean and clean-shaven, and his eyes were the color of wet slate. He looked to be about 40. He looked, Toomey thought later, like a man who had killed people and slept fine afterward. "I'm looking for a woman," the stranger said. His voice was soft, almost polite. Dark hair, about so tall. Green eyes. Might be going by the name Hartley. Might be going by something else. She'd have come through here in the last 3 months. Toomey did not move. He did not blink. He was a foreman, and he had been a foreman for 11 years, and one thing you learned in 11 years was when to lie and when to tell the truth and when to say nothing at all. Lot of women pass through Bitter Fork, Toomey said carefully. Can't say I recall one in particular. This one you'd recall, the stranger said, and he smiled. It was a smile with no warmth in it at all. She cooks. She cooks like an angel. Toomey's stomach went cold, but he kept his face flat. Sorry, friend. Can't help you. The stranger looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked past Toomey, toward the big white house with the sagging porch, and toward the cookhouse where a thin curl of wood smoke was rising into the July sky, and toward the small figure in a gray dress and white apron who had just stepped out onto the cookhouse steps carrying a wooden bowl. Elena Callahan froze. She was maybe 80 yards away. Too far, Toomey thought, for her to have heard the conversation. But she had seen the roan horse. She had seen the gray duster. She had seen the man's face, and the man's face had seen hers, and the bowl in her hands began to tremble very slightly. The stranger's smile widened. Well now, he said quietly. There she is. He touched the brim of his hat. To Toomey, to Elena, to the whole ranch. He turned his horse. He rode back down the road at a slow, easy walk, and he did not look back, and somehow that was worse than if he had. Because a man who does not look back is a man who is coming back. Toomey stood in the road and watched him go until he was a small gray dot in the shimmer. Then he turned and walked, fast, toward the cookhouse. Elena was inside by the time he got there. She had set the bowl on the counter. She was standing very still, both hands flat on the wooden countertop, and she was breathing the slow, careful breaths of a person who was trying not to be sick. Ma'am, Toomey said, and he took off his hat, which he almost never did. Ma'am, who was that man? She did not answer right away. Mrs. Callahan. His name is Roy Deal, she said. She did not look up. Her voice was flat and quiet. He is a Pinkerton. Or he was. He isn't anymore. She swallowed. He works for a man named August Vance. In St. Louis. Toomey waited. My name is not Elena Hartley, she said. It was. Once. A long time ago. She finally raised her eyes to him, and Toomey saw that they were not afraid. They were tired. Bone-tired. Tired in a way a young woman's eyes should never be. Mr. Toomey, I need to speak to my husband, and then I need to leave this ranch. Tonight, before that man comes back. He'll come back with more of them, won't he? Toomey said. It was not a question. Yes. How many? She thought about it. 6, 8, however many August Vance thinks it will take. Toomey put his hat back on. He was 51 years old. He had fought in the war. He had killed a man in Kansas over a card game and another one in Colorado over a horse. He was not a soft man, and he was not a sentimental man, and he did not like being lied to. He should have been angry. He was not angry. He was thinking about the bread. He was thinking about Cortez crying quietly into his sleeve. He was thinking about how, 3 months ago, this ranch had felt like a place where men came to die slowly, and how now, somehow, it felt like a place where men came home. Mrs. Callahan, he said, you go find your husband. I'll get the boys. Mr. Toomey. Ma'am. He looked her dead in the eye. You fed us. For 3 months, you fed us. Ain't a man on this outfit gonna let some Pinkerton drag you off this land. Not one. He paused. Now go find Silas. She went. She found him in the barn. He was rubbing down his big bay gelding, and he was whistling low and tuneless, the way he did when he was thinking about nothing at all. He looked up when she came in, and he smiled at her, and the smile fell off his face when he saw hers. Elena! She closed the barn door behind her. She leaned against it, and in the soft yellow light of the single lantern, in the smell of hay and horse and leather, Elena Callahan finally told her husband the truth, or most of it, enough of it. She told him about a man named August Vance, and a house in St. Louis, and a marriage that had not been a marriage but a cage. She told him about a night 2 years ago when she had put a knife between her first husband's ribs, because he had put a coffee pot to her arm one time too many, and about how August Vance was that husband's brother, and about how a Pinkerton named Roy Deal had been hunting her ever since. She told him she had killed a man. She told him she would understand if he wanted her gone. Silas Callahan stood in the lantern light and listened to every word, and when she was finished, he did not speak for a long time. He just looked at her, and then he walked past her, and he opened the barn door, and he called across the yard, in a voice that carried all the way to the bunkhouse. "Toomey! Get every man armed. Every man. And somebody ride to Redemption Flats and tell the sheriff. No, belay that. Don't tell the sheriff anything. Just get the boys." He turned back to his wife. "You ain't going anywhere, Elena," he said quietly. "This is your home." And outside, somewhere on the long road south, the dust of Roy Deal's horse had not yet settled. They came 4 nights later. Not 6 men. Not 8. 11. Silas Callahan was standing on his sagging porch when he saw the dust. It was just after sundown, and the sky was that deep bruised purple that only happens in high desert country in the last week of July. The dust came up the south road in a long, slow plume, and Silas knew before he could count the riders that Roy Deal had brought a small army. "Toomey!" he called, but Toomey was already moving. Toomey had been moving for 4 days. In those 4 days, the Callahan Ranch had become a fortress. Not the loud, obvious kind. Silas was smarter than that. From the road, the place looked exactly the way it had always looked. Cattle in the far pasture. Smoke from the cookhouse chimney. A single hand on the fence line mending wire. It looked like a working ranch on a working evening. But behind the big white house, in the shadow of the smokehouse, 6 men were crouched with rifles. In the hayloft of the barn, 2 of the best shots on the outfit, a Tennessean named Briggs and a half-Comanche tracker called Little John, were lying flat on their bellies with Sharp's rifles and boxes of ammunition. In the cookhouse, Pike had rebuilt an old habit from Antietam and was standing behind the doorframe with a shotgun in each hand and his bayonet, at last, out from under the flour sack. On the roof of the bunkhouse, 4 more men were flat against the shingles, invisible from the road. 30 men. That was Silas Callahan's payroll. 30 men who had eaten Elena's bread. And every one of them was in a position to kill. Elena herself was in the root cellar. Silas had put her there himself. He had kissed her once, hard and quick on the forehead, and he had closed the heavy wooden door, and he had said, "Whatever happens up here, you don't come out until I open this door. You hear me? Not for gunshots, not for screams, not for a man calling my name in my voice. You wait." She had nodded. She had a lantern and a jug of water and the pearl-handled derringer. And a rifle, because Silas had learned in 4 days that his wife could shoot better than most of his men. Now he stood on his porch alone in a clean white shirt, with no gun visible on his hip, and he watched Roy Deal and 10 armed riders come up his road. They stopped 50 yards from the porch. Deal raised one hand. His men fanned out in a loose half-circle. They had rifles across their saddles. They had the easy, bored look of men who had done this kind of work before and expected it to go the way it usually went. "Silas Callahan," Deal called, still that soft, polite voice. "I hear you got yourself a wife." "I do," Silas said. "I got a warrant for her, Mr. Callahan. Out of Missouri. Murder in the 1st degree." Deal smiled his cold smile. "You hand her over, and me and my boys ride out of here, and you go back to your cattle, and nobody has to bleed on your nice porch." "That warrant signed by a judge?" Silas asked. Deal's smile flickered, just a hair. "It's signed by August Vance." "Vance ain't a judge. Vance is a man who pays his debts," Deal said. "And this is a debt." Silas Callahan took 1 step forward. His boots creaked on the sagging boards. His hands were empty. His voice, when it came, was calm. The calm of a man who has already decided everything. "Mr. Deal," he said, "my wife is not for sale. She is not for trade. She is not for August Vance's private justice. She is my wife, on my land, in the state of New Mexico. And if you or any of your boys touches a splinter of this porch, you will die on it." Deal laughed. He actually laughed. He looked back at his 10 men, And a couple of them laughed too, though the laughs were nervous, because the sun was almost gone and there was something wrong with the ranch, something too quiet, and the older men in the group had felt it the moment they rode through the gate. "Callahan," Deal said, still smiling. "There are 11 of us. I count one of you." Silas said, "Count again." He did not raise his hand. He did not shout an order. He simply took one small step backward, so that he was no longer in the line of fire from the hayloft. And then Toomey, from the smokehouse shadow, cocked a rifle. It was a small sound, a single metallic click in the blue evening air. But out in the desert, in that particular stillness, it carried. And it was answered instantly, deliberately, by the click of another rifle from the barn loft, and another from the bunkhouse roof, and another from the cookhouse door, and another and another and another, until the whole yard seemed to be clicking, like a great insect waking up in the dusk, and Roy Deal's smile finally fell off his face. He looked around. He saw the rifle barrels then. Not all of them. He never saw all of them, but he saw enough. He saw the glint of Briggs's sharps in the hayloft. He saw Pike's shotgun in the cookhouse door. He saw the 4 dark shapes on the bunkhouse roof. He saw Toomey step out from the smokehouse with his Winchester leveled at Deal's chest, and he saw, at last, that he had ridden into something he did not understand. "Now, Mr. Deal," Silas Callahan said, in that same calm voice, "you can turn your horses around, or you can die here. Those are the choices. I'm going to count to 5. Callahan. 1. You don't know what she... 2. August Vance will burn this. 3. One of Deal's younger men broke. He wheeled his horse hard and kicked it into a run back down the south road. Another followed, then a third. 4. Deal's hand twitched toward his pistol. He was fast. Silas would say later, in a quiet voice, that Roy Deal was the fastest man he had ever seen touch a gun. He was not fast enough. Briggs's Sharps rifle spoke first from the hayloft. One deep, rolling boom that echoed off the red bluffs, and Roy Deal came off his horse backward, and he was dead before he hit the dust of Silas Callahan's road. Then everything happened at once. 2 of Deal's remaining men fired wild. Toomey shot one out of the saddle. Pike's shotgun took the other one in the shoulder and spun him half around. The rest, 5 men now in a swirl of frightened horses and gunsmoke, threw down their weapons and put their hands in the air, and the Callahan ranch, 30 guns strong, held its fire. It was over in maybe 14 seconds. 3 of Deal's men were dead in the road. 2 were wounded. 6 had run or surrendered or both. Silas Callahan had not fired a shot. He stood on his porch in his clean white shirt, and he watched the dust settle over the bodies of men who had ridden into his home to take his wife, and he felt, for the first time in 6 years, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Then he heard the cellar door open behind the house. She had come out. Of course she had come out. She walked around the corner of the house in her gray dress, with her hair coming loose from its pins, and she looked at the bodies in the road, and she looked at her husband on the porch, and her face did a thing Silas had never seen it do before. It broke, just for a second, just long enough for him to see the girl underneath. The girl she must have been once before a man named Vance had put a coffee pot to her arm. Then it closed up again, calm and still, the way it always was. "Silas," she said quietly, "it isn't over." "I know," he said, because August Vance was still in St. Louis. And August Vance had just lost 11 men and a Pinkerton to a cattle rancher in New Mexico. And August Vance, Elena had told him, was not the kind of man who took a loss. The letter came 10 days later. It arrived in Redemption Flats on the eastbound stage, in a thick cream envelope with a wax seal, addressed in a fine copperplate hand to Mr. Silas Callahan, Callahan Ranch, New Mexico Territory. The postmaster in Redemption Flats held it up to the light for a long time before he put it in the mail sack for the southbound rider. He had never seen a seal like it. It was pressed with the letter V. Silas opened it on his porch, in the same chair where he had sat the night Roy Deal came up his road. He read it once. He read it twice. Then he handed it, without a word, to his wife. Elena read it standing up. "Mr. Callahan?" the letter said in that fine copperplate. I am given to understand that you are in possession of a woman calling herself Elena Rose Hartley, and that certain agents of mine, sent to retrieve her, met with an unfortunate accident on your property. Please accept my condolences for the inconvenience. I am a reasonable man. I have no wish to prolong this matter. The woman in question is my sister-in-law, and she is guilty of the murder of my brother, Charles Vance, on the night of March the 11th, 1876. She has been a fugitive from justice for 2 years and 4 months. Her return to St. Louis, alive, is a matter of family honor and of law. I am prepared to offer you the sum of $10,000 in gold for her safe delivery to my representative in Santa Fe on the 1st of September. This is a generous offer, and it is a final one. Should you refuse, I regret to inform you that certain other measures will be taken. I have a long memory, Mr. Callahan, and I have longer arms. Your ranch is well staffed and well armed, but you cannot watch every fence line, every water hole, and every mile of open range. Cattle burn, barns burn, men in bunkhouses burn. I trust you will make the sensible choice. Yours in expectation, August Vance. Elena finished reading. She folded the letter very carefully. She set it on the porch rail. And then she began, quietly and without any sound, to cry. Silas had never seen her cry before. Not once. Not through the night after the gunfight, when she had washed blood off the porch boards with her own hands. Not when they buried Roy Deal and the other two under a pile of stones out past the west pasture, because the sheriff in Redemption Flats had asked no questions and Silas had offered no answers. She had not cried through any of it. She cried now, silently, because she understood what her husband did not yet understand. She understood that August Vance would do it. He would burn the ranch. He would kill the men. He would salt the wells. He had done it before to other people in other places over smaller things than the death of a brother. And there was only one way to stop him. She had to go back. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. She turned to Silas. She opened her mouth to tell him. No, he said. Silas. No, Elena. He will burn every... I said no. He stood up. He walked to the porch rail. He looked out over his land, the yellow grass, the red bluffs, the far pasture where the cattle were small brown shapes in the evening light, and Silas Callahan, who had spoken maybe 1,000 words in his entire adult life, spoke the longest speech of his life. Elena, he said, I want you to listen to me. I lost Martha to a fever I could have done something about if I had been home. I have carried that for 6 years. I have been half a man for 6 years. When you came out of the rain in Bitter Fork, I did not know your name and I did not know your story and I did not care. I saw you and I thought, God help me, maybe I get to be a whole man again. And then you cooked, and you fed my men. And you sat on this porch with me in the evenings and you read your little book of poems and you did not ask me one thing about Martha, not one thing, because you knew I couldn't yet. You gave this ranch a soul, Elena. You gave me one. August Vance can burn my barns. He can burn my house. He can shoot my cattle in their pastures and salt every well from here to the Rio Grande. I don't care. Do you hear me? I don't care. Because if I put you on a stage to Santa Fe, I will be half a man again for the rest of my life. And this time there won't be any rain and any awning and any stranger with green eyes to fix me. He turned to her. I ain't sending you back. She was crying harder now. She was shaking her head. Then he'll come himself, she whispered. Good, Silas Callahan said. Let him come. That night, at the long plank table in the cookhouse, Silas Callahan called every man on his payroll to supper. 30 men. He told them about the letter. He read it out loud. He told them about the $10,000 in gold. He told them what August Vance had promised to do if the answer was no. Then he told them that the answer was no. He told them that any man who wanted to draw his last pay and ride out in the morning could do so with no hard feelings and a written recommendation to any outfit in the territory. He said it plain, and he said it once, and then he sat down. The cookhouse was very quiet. Pike stood up first. He was still holding a piece of Elena's bread. He looked at it and he looked at her. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, small and pale in the lamplight, and he said in a voice like gravel, "I ate at a lot of tables, Mrs. Callahan. Army tables, chuck wagons, boarding houses, my own mama's table, God rest her." He paused. He seemed to be having trouble with his throat. "Yours is the best one. I ain't leaving it." He sat down. Then Toomey stood up. "I ain't leaving it either." Then Briggs. Then Little John. Then Cortez, who was crying again, and did not seem to mind who saw it. Then Willie. Then every man in that cookhouse, one after another, 30 men on their feet in the yellow lamplight. And not one of them, not a single one, took the offer of the eastbound road. Elena Callahan put her hands over her face. Silas walked across the cookhouse. He put his arm around his wife's shoulders. He looked at his men who had come to his ranch for wages and had stayed for something else, something they did not have a word for, and he said quietly, "Then we'd best get to work, boys. He's coming." And outside, the wind came down off the black hills, and it pushed the dust across the yard, and it smelled, faintly and impossibly, of rosemary bread rising in a warm kitchen. August Vance came in the last week of August, on a private railcar with 22 men. He was not what anyone expected. Elena had described him as a monster, and the men had built a monster in their heads. Some huge scarred killer, some black-eyed devil. But the man who stepped off the railcar at the little water stop 12 miles east of Redemption Flats was small, slight, maybe 5'6" in his boots. He wore a beautifully cut black suit and a white shirt with a pearl stud, and his hair was silver at the temples, and his eyes were the exact same pale green as Elena's. That was the thing that would haunt Silas Callahan for the rest of his life. He had not known. Elena had not told him. Not everything. August Vance was not her brother-in-law. August Vance was her father. She had married his son. That much was true. His son Charles had been a beast, and she had killed Charles with a kitchen knife on the night of March the 11th, 1876, and that was true too. But the man hunting her, the man who had sent Roy Deal, and the 11 riders and now 22 more, was not avenging a brother. He was reclaiming a daughter he had raised in a locked house in St. Louis, a daughter he had married off at 19 to a business partner's son, because it consolidated a shipping empire, a daughter who had escaped him twice before and been dragged back twice and had finally, on the third try, disappeared into the American West with a small carpet bag and a pearl-handled derringer that had once belonged to her mother. Silas learned all of this in a single conversation in his own parlor on the night before the fight. August Vance had ridden alone to the ranch, under a flag of truce, in a black carriage. He had come to the front porch. He had removed his hat. He had asked, very politely, to speak with his daughter and her husband. And Silas Callahan, who had killed no man in his life and was about to kill several, had let him in. They sat in the parlor. Elena did not sit. She stood by the window in her gray dress, with the derringer visible now, tucked into her belt. "Elena," August Vance said gently, "you have led me a long chase. You are not taking me back," she said. "No," he said, and he smiled. It was Elena's smile, exactly small, tired, held in. "No, my dear, I have accepted that. You are 28 years old. You have made your choice. I am here to make mine." He turned to Silas. "Mr. Callahan, my daughter says you are a decent man. My daughter has never in her life said that of any man, including her father. So I will believe her, and I will make you an offer." Silas said nothing. "I have 22 men camped on your east fence," Vance said, still gently. "They are, I am sorry to say, considerably better than Roy Deal and his boys. Some of them fought at Shiloh. 2 of them are former Texas Rangers. They will, if I give the word, kill every man on your payroll and burn every structure on your land. I am telling you this not as a threat, but as a fact. However," he folded his small hands in his lap, "I have grown old, Mr. Callahan. I have grown old, and I have grown tired, and I have watched my daughter run from me for the third and final time. And I find, sitting here in your parlor, that I do not wish to kill you." He looked at Elena. "I wish to see her fed." Silas Callahan did not understand. Not for a moment. He blinked. I have heard, Vance said softly, from certain drovers who have passed through Missouri, and from a peach cobbler recipe that made its way, by way of a Mrs. Hollis, into St. Louis newspaper, that my daughter has become a cook. A remarkable cook. On a ranch in New Mexico. His eyes were wet, though his voice was not. Elena, when you were 7 years old, you used to bake bread with your mother. Do you remember? Elena's hand, on the derringer, trembled once, then went still. I remember, she whispered. Your mother has been dead for 21 years, Elena, and I have been alone for 21 years. And I have done terrible things in those years, and I do not ask you to forgive them. I only ask, his voice caught, just barely, I only ask, before I go back to St. Louis and die in that house, that you feed me one meal, from your kitchen, on this ranch. That is all. I will call off my men tonight. I will sign whatever paper you like. And I will never trouble you again. The parlor was very quiet. Silas looked at his wife. He did not know what to think. He did not know if it was a trick. He did not know if August Vance was a man dying of a grief he had made himself, or a wolf in a black suit. Elena stared at her father for a long, long time. Then she went to the kitchen. She baked the bread. Rosemary and honey, the same recipe she had made on her first day in Pike's kitchen. She made a stew. She set the table in the big dining room that had not been used since Martha died. She lit 2 candles. And she and Silas and August Vance sat down together, 3 people who should never have been at the same table, and they ate. August Vance ate slowly. He ate every crumb of his bread. He did not speak much. Once, in the middle of the meal, he closed his eyes for a long moment, and a single tear ran down his cheek and disappeared into his silver beard. He did not wipe it away. He did not seem to know it was there. When he was finished, he stood. He bowed to Elena, formal and small and old. He bowed to Silas. He put on his hat. He walked out to his black carriage. And he rode away east, toward the water stop and the private rail car, and Silas Callahan stood on his porch and watched the dust of him go. And he did not know, and would never know, whether the man had meant a single word of it. But at sunrise, the 22 men on the east fence were gone. And on the seat of the porch, tucked under a stone, was a small envelope. Inside was a bank draft for $100,000, drawn on a St. Louis bank, made out to Mrs. Elena Callahan, and a single line in that same fine copper plate. For the ranch, for the men, for the bread. Hey! Elena looked at it a long time. Then she walked to the kitchen stove and she opened the door, and she fed the bank draft into the fire. We don't need it, she said quietly. Silas Callahan put his arms around his wife, and he held her, and he did not say a word, because there were no words left in him that were big enough. 6 months later, August Vance died in his sleep in the locked house in St. Louis. He left everything he owned to a daughter he had not seen since the night in the parlor. She burned that bequest too. Every deed, every share, every dollar. She burned it all in the kitchen stove over a period of 3 cold December nights, and she never told Silas how much it had been, and Silas, being Silas, never asked. They lived on the Callahan Ranch for 41 more years. She cooked every night. He fixed the sagging porch finally in the spring of 1881. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and the girl, when she grew up, had her mother's pale green eyes and her mother's steady hands, and she baked bread that made grown men cry, though nobody could ever say exactly why. Pike stayed on as second cook until he died in 1894, of nothing in particular. Toomey stayed on as foreman until 1902. Cortez became a foreman himself on his own outfit up in Wyoming, and he wrote Elena a letter every Christmas for 30 years, and every letter began the same way. Dear Mrs. Callahan, I still remember the bread. Silas Callahan died in the winter of 1919, in his own bed, with his wife's hand in his. His last words, according to the daughter who was there, were not "I love you," though he did love her, and she knew it. His last words were, "Elena, something smells good." She buried him under the cottonwood by the west pasture. She lived for more years. She was buried beside him in the spring of 1923, at the age of 73, and the whole county came, and Cortez rode down from Wyoming old and stooped, and he stood by her grave for a long time in his best black hat. And he did not cry, because he had done all his crying a long, long time ago, at a plank table in a cookhouse, over a slice of warm bread. They say in Redemption Flats that on quiet summer nights, if the wind is right, you can still smell it out by the old Callahan place. Rosemary, honey, bread rising in a warm kitchen, a woman's small careful hands, a ranch full of hard men sitting down together being fed. They say a lot of things in Redemption Flats. Some of them this time might even be true. So tell me, if you had been Silas Callahan on that sagging porch, with a letter in your hand and a wife in your kitchen and 11 armed men riding up your road, what would you have done in his place? Would you have opened the door to the man in the black suit? Would you have burned the bank draft in the stove? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. And if this story stayed with you, even a little, share it with someone tonight who needs to be reminded that sometimes the softest hands in the room are the ones holding everything together. Stay safe out there, and keep the porch light on.